Graeme, thank you very much. It's fantastic. There's clearly, it seems to me from what you've said, a huge amount of overlap between the world you've come from and the world that we inhabit. I wrote down some of the words and terms you talked about: team working, feedback on performance, flexibility, the need to get staff to change, and leadership. These are all things that we think about in our work trying to improve what's going on in universities. And that talk, I think, was just fantastic. One of the things I particularly liked about that I really, really wish we could get across more clearly. Science is so creative, and it's so often seen as not creative. And to fail to get that across in schools and to our students, I think, is a challenge still. Fine, that's enough, mate. Questions for Anne or Graeme? And could you tell us who you are and what...
Yeah, I'm Hugh Fraser, retired as an experimental veterinary pathologist. One of the things that concerns me is the unique position of Homo sapiens, our species, on the planet. As a beekeeper, I'm aware that bees waste nothing. Bees don't go running, they don't go jogging. They don't have technology, they don't have progress. When we invented, what did we invent 5,000 years ago? The wheel and the plough. Now, since then, we've made enormous progress. But the waste that we have, we rifle the surface of the planet. No other species does that. The unique position of Homo sapiens is, I think, something which students for the 21st century should be thinking more globally about the damage. The increased population in China and the Far East. I suspect that they are thinking about that because it's fairly new in the newly developing ex-communist countries, particularly in the Far East. That's really my point.
Can I ask, can you hear me at the back if I just... Okay, there's nodding. That's a very interesting point, and it does reflect perhaps how we should teach our students, and I'm meaning here primary, secondary, further higher education. And that is that if I go to university to study high energy physics, I shouldn't just be taught about high energy physics. And I think what your question sort of looks towards is this sort of zero waste society. It's not just a nice thing to think about, it's an absolute necessity, because we can't survive on the planet. We could have survived being terribly wasteful as we currently are if there weren't so many of us. But the problem is, with 9 billion of us, there's just not enough stuff on the planet to be able to sustain us. So although I wouldn't recommend that we didn't run and jog and all the rest of it and so on, we probably need to do that because we're different from bees. I guess we would agree on that. But what we can't do is just give people education which is very narrow. And I think everybody here would agree with that, is that you have to teach people in a very broad way. And we probably don't do that enough now. And in the past, students have been very resistant to it. You know, I've come here to learn about chemistry, so I'm not interested in X, Y, and Z. But an education now is a very broad thing. We've had a history of it in Scotland, particularly at our primary and secondary school. We need to explore that for our further and higher education. And I think it would help deliver people that might think more the way you're appreciating that it's necessary to think to be able to sustain our position on the planet, really.
Well, I should probably declare some interest in this. I think Phil said I've got an energy renewable company now that when I left Rolls-Royce I started, and it's basically a thing called anaerobic digestion. I don't know whether anybody's aware of it, but basically I take food waste that's going to landfill and we divert it and we turn it into green electricity. And we've just opened up a big facility in Cumbernauld. But I think the point, again, getting back with this integration, if you take waste, I mean, most of us now in our homes, or, we've got bins of different colours to try and it's only a small thing, I know, but getting back to this integration point, it seems to me that, if you study science or secondary school, going into university, the more that people, I think from industry, if we can integrate this better at that stage, people will get to know more about what's going on rather than maybe the narrow discipline that they feel that they want to pursue, if you like, as a career. So I think I agree with most of what you've said, but probably I'm taking advantage of it at the moment to make some money.
Another question.
Hello. Hello, I'm Klaus Kaufmann, University of Glasgow, a PhD student, and working for the enhancement themes on 2 projects. Question to Graeme. I was particularly intrigued by your suggestion that lecturers and teachers could spend some time in industry in order to probably be more credible in their teachings. Having said that, could you talk us through the experiences in recruiting or in having teachers and lecturers in your company? Is this a model that you believe is feasible for the future?
Well, I think I did say that the feedback that we got was, very, very strong and very, very supportive of what we had done. And some of the other things I'm involved in, the Skills Utilisation Leadership Group, is clearly something that we do talk about. And one of the problems that we have in that group, and I think it's in a lot of issues, is that in the classroom environment we can talk about all the things that we want to do, but it's how you actually implement that in practice and how you get people to take it on. And I don't want to say anything that sounds on blowing my own trumpet here, but you need to have leaders in some of these other companies who would offer that facility. I was prepared to offer that facility in the leadership role that I had because I felt it was important as something that we could look at that might take us forward. So I would encourage, as much as possible, that type of arrangement. It may go on in other parts of the country, I'm not sure. But all I can say from the experience that we had and from what the lecturers said when they went back, as you say, I don't know whether credibility is right, and that may be the right term, but certainly they're far more useful conversation with their students beyond that point than what they had before.
Can I just add to that as well? I mean, it's interesting because I think that's been picked up not just at undergraduate level but postgraduate. So Strathclyde and Glasgow at the moment are putting together a joint bid for a BBSRC doctoral training programme in which we have to specify how we are going to find time for those students to spend 25% of their time working off campus with other institutions, with other organisations, with a move to make it not simply moving from doing a degree in pharmacology and working in big pharma, but actually quite radical shift so that when you move out you can see how your skills might contextualise in novel environments. I think that is something that is getting picked up, and I suspect, despite what I imagine will be quite serious resistance, that this will be a good experience for students.
Actually, could I just as well? I was also impressed by what Graeme said about taking lecturers and putting them out into the work environment, and it was partly because quite a while ago in my own working life, I realised that I'd never really been in the real world, if you know what I mean. So I'd been at school, I'd been at university, I'd carried on and been in a research world, and that's not the real world actually. It's very different from the real world. And so it became quite hard for me to, for example, attract research funding from industry because I didn't understand their world. So if I had had the opportunity to go out and to work with them and understand their pressures, their time scales, how they interacted, similarities, differences, it would have been great to equip me with a whole set of new skills, but I do think it would have been really helpful for my students. So, I think it's a really interesting example, that one.
I mean, one of the other things at Rolls-Royce, and I think it's still the case, and certainly at Strathclyde, we fund a chair in Jim MacDonald's old faculty. But basically, Rolls-Royce's view was that a lot of the ideas, are generated in university, but maybe less successful in commercialising and taking these ideas to market. Rolls-Royce has got great commercial marketing experience, join up together and, both of them working in collaboration, maybe able to do things better in that arrangement than what they were able to do working independently. And that's a global network that Rolls-Royce have got.
Val.
It's a very short question. That's when the music stops.
Yes, that's right. What's in the parcel, Val?
After all that, it's going to be a very short question. Hi, I'm Val Belton from Strathclyde, and I wonder if you could both help me. My role is Associate Deputy Principal for Learning and Teaching, and one of the things that I'm seeking to try and encourage in my colleagues at Strathclyde is for them to encourage the students to get an international experience. And traditionally, students in the arts faculty, languages students, have to go abroad, keen to go abroad. There's a good rationale. I come from business myself, and we have no problem persuading business students that they can benefit from learning about business from an international perspective. But it's a much bigger challenge to persuade both my colleagues and students in engineering, and even more so in science, that an international experience would be useful for students. So could you give me some messages that I might take back to sell it to them, or suggestions of way that the international experience could be more for students than simply going and learning mathematics in French, or learning mathematics even in New Zealand in English? Then it would be, how different would it be for them being at Strathclyde?
Well, one thing for me is employability. So if you are a student who's had an international experience, you become much more employable. Whatever your employer, even if your employer is initially here in the UK, if you've had that experience elsewhere, so a student should be bearing that in mind because it's important for them. You raise a very interesting point, because I know from my own experience that science students, even although we offer them placements working, let's say, in China or in India, because Scotland has international plans for collaboration with China and India, for example, so there are opportunities. Our students don't want to go. They seem, if I'm honest, it's almost that they seem rather frightened by the they think, well, I can't speak Chinese. Actually, it doesn't matter, because one of the wonderful things about science is that science is an international language in itself, and it's spoken broadly in English. And anyway, if you go to a country, if you go to China, nobody's going to expect you to speak Chinese or Cantonese when you go there. So I think it's to help you, if we could come up with role models of people who've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, that would break down the barriers a bit. And we could use our companies based in Scotland who have international offices or placements. So linking up with, for example, Scottish Enterprise or Scottish Development International, who have the database of all those connections. That could be a way of making it initially safer for students to make the leap. But I'm sure they would enjoy it if they did it. But that's
I'm sure
easier said than done.
No, I would agree. I think it all comes down to employability. Remember what I said about Sir John Rose? You would not get a senior leadership role unless you had an international experience. And I think, if you take it beyond engineering and science disciplines, maybe that's where, as you say, there is a reluctance. But it's all about experience in other cultures. I mean, I used to get a lot of people coming to see me at East Kilbride to understand what our business transformation, the whole 9 yards, if you like, about what we actually done. And if you take Hong Kong, for example, where they wanted to try and introduce team-based working. In team-based working in Scotland, say, for example, in my experience, when we gave our guys their head within a framework, they're creative, innovative, come up with ideas, how we can save costs, control our own budgets, take our own decisions. Hong Kong, the culture appears to be more compliant, that people want to be told what to do, so in the industry that I worked in anyway. So team-based working had its benefits, but not the same benefits for our Hong Kong joint venture than what it had, if you like, for our joint venture at East Kilbride. But just experiencing that culture and to me, must be beneficial for people. And again, through Scottish Enterprise, Jim McDonald's and the board of Scottish Enterprise as well, we should be able to do something that is, Anne said, there is connection to Global Scots, there's people, companies that we could maybe help people to maybe take that initial step.
I think getting those messages to the sort of breadth of the students is really quite important. There are some that will go, of course, but the majority are reluctant for all kinds of reasons.
Could I just add one other thing that I'm thinking about? And this came out either earlier today or last night at a meeting I was at, and I can't even remember now when it was. But we could do more about our teaching in terms of teaching more innovatively to try and break down those barriers. So, for example, someone was saying to me yesterday that you could teach physical education, but teach it in French, for example. There's no reason that we couldn't, just start using French when you're teaching people to do things and, playing basketball or something like that. You could just teach them in French. And if I think of our universities are absolutely chock-a-block full of international people, because this is one of the best places in the world to come and do your research, as I mentioned earlier. So why not get them, as just part of their teaching, to start using their own natural language, and to just, or even offer that, ask them if they might give that time, as you were saying, sort of to do additional things other than just deliver their job. But say to them, would you do an hour at the end of the day in French, Spanish, Cantonese, German, whatever it happened to be, just conversationally to your students? They don't get marked on it or anything, but they can come along. I would have loved that at university if I could have gone to conversational Spanish classes, at the end of my biochemistry classes. But we could easily deliver it, and it would be a good way of teaching, and it might help to break down the barriers. So, thanks.
That's a fascinating idea.
Yes.
I'm mentally identifying.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you. This is in part a response to Val and I suppose a wider question. My name is Simon Rayside and I work with the British Council in our internationalising higher education. I run a program called IASTI, which many of you will be familiar with. We have placements in many of the departments, probably represented here. Briefly, we exchange students between Scotland and the rest of the world, trying to find them placements in industry. And that's part response and part question, I suppose, because it seems fairly easy to get placements and to find positions for students in research, from my point of view. But to get them that extra step into industry, and I suppose, for students in Scotland and for students abroad, where we're looking for Scottish placements in industry, that's a challenge that's only getting trickier. And I wonder if there's a way that, that we can link up more. It's also that point on collaborative approach in terms of making those links between institutions and industry.
I would again probably say that Scottish Enterprise may be a port of call, for you, because through their account managed companies in Scotland, for example, they'll be well aware of some of these companies who are maybe dealing in the global market. So therefore, say they were dealing in, I don't know, Italy, say for example, that maybe an Italian student coming to work from as a placement may actually be beneficial both to the Italian student and to that business because of the language and the market that he would probably know about. So if you're not wired into Scottish Enterprise, I would think that is something that you should think about.
And there's also an organisation that they manage, I think it's Scottish Development International manage it, called Global Scots. And these are people who either have some very strong connection to Scotland and are Scottish and have gone abroad, or have come here, worked here for a long time and gone back to where they came from. But they're referred to as Global Scots. They're always very successful, and they're always very keen to try and give something back to Scotland. So there's a huge network of them, and they all work primarily for businesses rather than being academics. So they would be great people to sort of link up with and say, can you put me in touch with a series of organisations where you are that might take some of our students? I think they'd be keen to do that. So.
Hi, my name is Waddell and I'm from Waddell University. I don't know if this question can be answered here, but I was thinking about the curriculum for excellence change that's happened in primary school and secondary school, and it kind of affects me because my son's just started it. And my understanding of it is that we're producing a more rounded student, where the disciplines are sort of interact with each. The science is interacting with something else. Now, do you think that will have an impact on higher education, where you have a different student coming in? Will that force us to change the way we teach? Because these students have a different experience and are maybe more able to ask more relevant questions, be more inventive in their ideas?
I hope so. The philosophy behind Curriculum for Excellence is to declutter the curriculum, to think about conceptual teaching rather than learning to be able to pass a test, but to get people to explore, to use imagination, particularly to free teachers up, to allow them to use their skills, their imagination and expertise to give students a really exciting experience. That's the philosophy. It's quite hard to implement that, because you have a whole teaching profession who have not been brought up with that as the way they should teach. So it's a big, big challenge for teachers. But at the end of the day, as somebody who receives students into my first year course in whatever, the big problem if I think over the sort of 25 to 30 odd years I've been teaching undergraduates, the best students are still as good as they ever were who come into universities. They're still as inquiring and challenging and so on. But we now have a very broad, there's a much higher uptake into higher education. So there's a very broad spectrum of students who come in. And when you teach to them, because of the way we have taught in schools, they come in and they say, do you know, you just gave me a 50-minute lecture. What do I need to know to pass the exam? Surely it's not all 50 minutes of it. And then they'll also say, and you've given me a textbook, and you've said chapter 7, but there's 15 pages in chapter 7. Which of the pages do I need to know? So that's very depressing for me. It's also very depressing for the student if that's the way they're thinking. What Curriculum for Excellence should allow these students to do is to come in and come up at the end and say, that bit you said about X was fascinating. Where can I learn more about that? Or that, or does it, it sort of reminded me of one of the other lectures I had in a different subject. Could you put me in touch with how I cross that barrier or whatever? That's the theory. I think it's going to be an enormous challenge to deliver that, but actually I know there's people in the office, and I see Alan Colquhoun here from Celex, and industries like Celex, for example, are putting a lot of time in to supporting teachers to be able to deliver real-life examples of science and engineering which can give them the sort of classroom support to inspire their kids. So there's a lot happening, and business is getting very interested in it, as well as universities, actually, to be able to do that. And if we can make the transition, it will be great for our kids. Yeah.
And the teachers will have to change as well.
Well, it'd be fantastic for teachers, though, because it must be awful saying you have to teach this, and you just, tick, tick, tick. But to go in and just do stuff you find interesting, brilliant.
I wouldn't profess to have any, an informed view about Curriculum for Excellence. All I would say is that if you talk about teacher changing, the only question I would throw out, and I know somebody said about business being involved, is the support there for the teachers in order for them to make that transition? That would seem to me to be very important.
If I might, we're getting close to closure. I'd just like to put one final point to both of you. It's not necessarily an attempt to create an argument, but I'd just like to hear a rationale. Graeme spoke very eloquently about the process he used at Rolls-Royce to change, but there was a clear rationale for change. Okay, there was business problems, business failures, other competitors. People can buy their engines somewhere else, and that transformation clearly was transformational for Rolls-Royce. And what I'd just like to do is to contrast that with what you said, Anne, about science and about all of these fantastic innovations in science, in visibility, in communication, in graphical representation, 3D printing. All of that science produced, I presume, by graduates of the past. Okay. Now, is there a sense in which universities don't face a need to change because we're so successful already? What, pithily, is the rationale for universities changing?
Because the world's changing. And for me, that's my bottom line, is that it is okay for graduates of the past to be delivering what we've got now, but the world is going to be different in 10 years' time, 30 years' time, 50 years' time. And if we just teach the same way, particularly when our worlds become much more global and our competition, and I hope this doesn't sound a negative thing, but we do have to be aware of a massive population of Chinese people, of Indian people, Asian people, who want part of it now. They want to be in the same world as we are and have the same standard of living and the same technology and the same opportunity. We can't survive if we stay still, I believe. And so we have to think about not just what we're doing now, but how we produce the graduates that can contribute and take part of that in the future. And that would be my rationale for change. We've done great in the past, as we did with Scottish education, was known worldwide as being superb, primary, secondary school education. And we got a real shock 2 or 3 years ago when one of the international reports said, actually, you've stood still and everybody else is rushing past you. And I fear that would happen to our university environment if we don't think about the needs for the future. Foresighting sort of idea. Yeah.
No, again, I think I would agree with that. I mean, using Rolls-Royce as an example, I mean, we get by for a wee while because we were Rolls-Royce, and the perception that people had about Rolls-Royce, that will take you so far. As Anne says, whatever university or establishment you're talking about, it's successful at the moment, but there's no guarantee of success unless it changes and keeps pace with the change as it moves forward. I mean, a thing I find quite ridiculous at the moment in the business world, particularly the private sector, but maybe in the public sector as well, is that people, because of the deficit, keep on saying, well, we'll cut out this waste, we'll not do this, we'll not do that. But you should have been doing that in the good times as well. I mean, why do you only address these issues when you think things are going against you? So when you're doing well, that for me is the time you need to start thinking about looking ahead and what changes you're going to need to make in order to maintain that success.
Good. Maintaining Scotland's Rolls-Royce higher education.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, both of you, for coming to talk to us today.
Thank you.
Hugely appreciated it. I'd like to show our appreciation of Anne and Graeme.
Thank you.